You are listening to the Better 2 podcast with DM Needham. Hi gang, Donna here. Today I had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Peter Wright. He is originally from London and moved to Zimbabwe. While he was in Zimbabwe, he became a farmer and unfortunately, due to the political climate, ended up having to give up his farm because he had a choice, his farm or his life. After he left Zimbabwe, he moved to Canada. But we talk more than just his journey that led him to Canada. We talk about his love of running, his love of walking, and his exploring the European continent. So tune in. Hi, Peter. How are you doing today?
I am very well, thank you, Donna. How are you?
I'm good. So where are you located right now?
I'm in a little city of Woodstock in southwest Ontario, much smaller or less famous than the big Woodstock in New York State, of course. We're a little city of about 40,000.
I have a town right over from me that's called Woodstock, and it's a lot smaller. However, it was pretty famous in the movie Groundhog Day with Bill Murray back in the 80s. And they still have the whole big groundhog celebration every year. But we're not here to talk about Groundhog Day. Oh. We're here to talk about your journey. So you used to live in South Africa, correct?
Correct, yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I'll keep it short, but I was born in England, went to a country that was called Rhodesia, which you probably remember that name. My dad was transferred there when I was a young boy, lived there for a lot of my life, and then moved to South Africa as a young adult, married with 2 small children because the security situation. Rhodesia was about to become Zimbabwe, and I was very concerned. Then lived in South Africa 14 years. Very interesting. It was up to the time that all the changes started. And despite a lot of the publicity, South Africa was a pretty good place for most people, even including all races, for a lot of the time that I was there. And saw lots of development. Had a good life there. It was a good life in many respects. So that's a nutshell.
Where in England were you born at?
Right in London.
Really?
And yeah, I would be a Cockney because I was born within the sounds of Bow Bells. There's a very popular TV series that people of our generation watch called Call the Midwife. I don't know if you've seen it, no. British series. And it's set in the early 50s, and it shows women in long skirts pushing, we call them prams, baby carriages with big wheels around the streets of that part of London. And it could have been my mother pushing me because it was shot exactly in the era when I was there as a baby.
Wow. Now, the last English show I watched was Broadchurch. I just finished that up.
Okay. Yeah.
So
good.
I have watched some English shows, but that one I'm not familiar with. So when you were in Zimbabwe, what does that, now you're in Woodstock, what made this change happen for you?
Okay. So in South Africa, I had my own business doing export trading and a few other things, and mainly because of politics. And if I'm honest, partly because I took my eye off the ball, my business went up in a great ball of smoke, and I lost everything. So I was middle-aged white man, and we were sort of unemployable species at that transition time in South Africa. And I had no money to start a new business. So my brother he'd stayed in Zimbabwe. He said, look, it's relatively stable. Why don't you come back? You probably get something going here easier than staying in South Africa. So I did. My marriage had broken up. My kids had left school. I was on my own, and I went back without even a car. So I lost everything in this business debacle, and started working with my brother, and then started another business of my own. Then I met my current partner, and we took over. We didn't inherit her family farm, and we were growing horticulture products for export to Europe. And we had a good life for about 10 years. And then politics once again reared its ugly head, and the Zimbabwe government decided it didn't want any more commercial farmers, mainly white, but there were some black commercial farmers who also, because they weren't politically connected, lost their farms. And we resisted as long as we could. And eventually the police put me in a jail cell and said, when you agree to leave your farm, we'll let you out. So my eldest son had moved to Canada in 98 because he'd met a girl in England and married her and come to see her father in Canada. Long story. So he said, come look at Canada. And we did. We had few options at that stage. We would have liked to come to your country, but the green card issue and no contacts and no money and no time to fool around. We really would have liked to gone to a warm place like Texas or somewhere. But
Understand. So did you ever think about going back home to England?
We did. Seriously, we had British passports. We could have gone. We had no family there at that time. My mother, she'd gone back to England a few years before, but she was very old. She couldn't have helped us much. And for some reason, we just felt, despite the cold, there were more opportunities in Canada. Whether that was right or wrong, no, there's pluses and minuses on both sides. But we had a son here. And ironically, after we came here, my partner's 2 kids went to England, and my brother and all his kids went to England. But that's just the way it goes, So,
yeah, life can zigzag all over the place.
All over.
And yeah. I had somebody interviewed recently from Dubai who actually went over to Canada, and he said he would have came to the US as well, but once again, it was a little harder to immigrate over here.
Right.
So he chose there. So how hard was it to reestablish yourself after you lost everything? I mean, it had to be scary for you, especially.
It was. I mean, we literally walked out with 2 suitcases each. We'd had horses, so we kept a saddle. We came to Canada with 2 suitcases and a horse saddle, and between us enough cash for an old F-150 pickup. We were very lucky. I got work on a farm, and the farmers had bought another farm and had an empty farmhouse, which was not the best. It was quite old, and said, would you mind living in that? And I said, we'll rent that with pleasure, because it's a roof over our heads. And we're still here 17 years later. The hardest part for me was doing manual work that I used to pay people to do. In peak season in Zimbabwe, I had 180 people working on my farm. The crops we grew were very labor intensive. In winter, we were down to about 50, 60. So I came here and I was working longer hours than any of my guys in Africa ever did under colder and more harsh conditions, and had to do it to survive, right? Because we just had nothing. So we did.
So what kind of crops were you growing back there versus the crops
here? Back there, I grew Mange 2 and sugar snap peas, and I grew something called granadilla or passion fruit. It's also known as. Grows on a vine, so those are grown in fairly big, very much like vineyards on trellises. Grew baby corn, which is regular corn, but picked for salad, about 3 or 4 inches long. Grew a little berry called the physalis, or also known in Africa as a Cape gooseberry, because it comes in a very attractive cape of leaf. Used as a decorative plant in Europe in restaurants and that. We did a lot of that. And then for local market, tomatoes, onions, potatoes, corn, obviously, or maize, as we called it. And we had beef cattle and about 20 horses. Yeah.
So it was really a full-time farm. I mean, it wasn't something that was just,
No, and by Canadian standards, big. We had 1,000 acres, but that was pretty small by Zimbabwe standards. But it was a big operation, and generating foreign currency, which helped the country.
How different is it for you to, have gone from Zimbabwe to Canada? I mean, culturally, how different is it?
Quite different. Canadians are very kind, but very law-abiding people, which is good. I'm not knocking that. I have a business partner in the one business I'm in now, and we were talking one day, and she said, "You sound frustrated." And I said, "It's hard to describe. There was lots of danger and adversity in Zimbabwe, but life was not dull." I said, I do find Canada a bit bland. I said, and this was my words, I said, "I miss living on the edge." And she said, "But the stories you told me of what happened to you, being thrown in a jail cell and had guns pointed at you, that can't have been pleasant." I said, "No, it wasn't. But it's like the spice of life, right?" So when all that's taken away, it sounds perverse, but you miss it. And this is why a lot of guys coming back from Afghanistan, Iraq, from the forces, find it so difficult to adjust to civilian life. And I did. I did 10 years part-time military in our terrorist war in Rhodesia. And when that was over, life was a little too quiet.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, when you go through something traumatic and it's on a daily basis, your body gets used to that. Your mind gets used to that. That's your mental status.
I'll just add though, one of the things that I found really difficult to adapt to was the red tape here. And I can see the purpose. For instance, on our farm, if we wanted to build a shed or call it a barn, or I wanted to build houses for my workers, and I built about 40 houses, I just built them. I didn't have to get anyone's permission. I didn't have to plan. If I wanted to put a new fence up around my property, I just did it. Whereas here, if it's more than 100 square feet, you've got to go through all the paperwork and get approval and this and that and the next thing. And I don't know. Same with business. There you just do it. As long as it's legal, do it. Here you got to have permits and this and that and the next thing. So I found that difficult to adapt to. Yeah.
But the United States is very much the same.
Oh yeah,
we went to fix just a couple of boards on our fence at our old house, and the city was like, "Well, you need a permit for that." To just replace a couple of boards of an existing structure, they still wanted a permit, and it was about money.
Yeah,
easy,
of course.
plain and simple. So, what was it like to when they came to take you? You said that you had guns in your face. I mean, how terrifying was this?
It was, but it not as you would imagine. A lot of people said, "Why did you stay so long?" I said, "Well, for several reasons. It was our home. We didn't want to give in. That farm had been in the family since the early 1950s. It had been legally purchased. We were employing people. There was absolutely no reason to move us off the farm except for politics. So we believed we should stay there. It was our property. We had nothing else to go to. The violence started and increased incrementally over 3 years. It didn't all happen overnight. So it started in the northwest of the country after Mugabe, the president, lost the referendum. And a lot of people said, a few guys will lose their farms, but then it'll settle down. And I said, I don't think so. This is a political strategy. Got to be prepared. So you hear of people quite far away from you losing their farms and getting assaulted and killed, and then it gets closer and closer. But you get somewhat inured, I suppose, to the violence because it's happening every day. So eventually, when it comes to you, you've been fairly well prepared. So we ended up being the second last operating farm in a district of 43. They'd got everyone else off their farms. We were still going, and they started stealing our equipment and our fences and our crops, and that didn't get us off. And then for about 6 weeks, not every day, but for up to 4 or 5 days at a time, we had a mob of 60 people outside our security fence, and 24 hours a day, they would be beating on oil barrels, lighting fires, saying, "We're coming to kill you, and get on the plane and go, and it's our land." And we would call the police, and they'd say, "Well, this is political. We can't help you. Just get off the farm, and all your problems go away." Oh yeah, seriously. And in the days when there was real violence, they were beating up some of our workers because most of our workers didn't want to join this mob. They were being coerced and intimidated into it. And those that resisted were beaten up. So we called the police and they'd say, "We have no gas." So my brother lived in the village. He would actually go and get the police and bring them down to the farm. And the same thing, they would say, "It's all your fault. Just go." So that went on and off for 6 weeks, and they piled lumber for the last week in front of our gate. So we couldn't get out, couldn't get off the property. And then I managed to hire extra security guards, and they chased some of them away. And then twice the police came to arrest me, and I managed to get out of their way. And the first time I saw them coming and went across the farm on my motorbike. The second time I got inside the security fence, locked the gates, and they were threatening to drive their Land Rover through the gates to get me. And I had my 9mm pistol on my belt, and I just patted it and said, "You drive through those gates, you're dead, pal." So the security policeman, plainclothes, got out with a small pistol on his belt. His guard in uniform got out with his AK-47, but he was visibly nervous because I hadn't shot anyone, but I had a reputation as not taking crap from anybody around there. And I said to the security policeman straight, I said, "I got a bigger gun than you, and I probably shot a lot more rounds through this and had a lot more experience than you have. So do you want to take a chance on this?" And eventually got back. Well, first of all, the guy with the AK-47 chickened out and got back in the Land Rover. So that was the firepower gone. So then the other guy decided he would go. So they left shouting threats and that. And I got caught because our last water pump was stolen by the mob, and we couldn't pump water from our well, or borehole as we called it, for our workers, our cattle, our horses, ourselves. And this sounds ridiculous, but the police would still act on criminal matters. So it's hard to picture this in the first world where we are living in fair stability, you could have a policeman in the morning trying to help you find a criminal who stole something off your farm. And the same policeman in the afternoon could be coming with the security police to arrest you because you were on your farm. Right now, and how crazy does that sound?
That's
So our last big pump, I had a brick pump house with welded steel gates and a welded mesh under the roof, the whole deal. But during the night, they'd managed to smash all that and steal the pump. And my security guard, my own guard, had said, I know where it's gone. There was a farm next door to us that had been abandoned, owners chased off, and a whole lot of these criminals or political thugs were using it as a base to intimidate workers around the place. So he said, I've tracked it, it's gone there. So I said, well, I'll get the police. And Sue, my partner, said, whatever you do, don't go to the police station. They're going to lock you up because they've tried twice to arrest you. But I was so mad. I wanted this pump and I wanted to be able to stay because without water, we couldn't stay on the farm. So yeah. I said, I'm going to take a chance. So I went to the police station on a Friday, which was a fatal mistake. And I'm standing in the charge office and talking to the policeman saying, I know where it is. Give me some men. I'll take them in my pickup. We go and get it back. Security police came behind, grabbed me, put me in handcuffs, said, come with us. And they interrogated me for 5 hours. I didn't get tortured. I thought they were going to beat me up, but they didn't. And I pushed their buttons a bit. They threw me in a police. Well, they took me home. They said, we know that you have been accumulating arms of war, automatic weapons. I said, the only weapons I've got, I have licenses for. So I have 2 pistols, a revolver, shotgun. Here, I have the licenses. But anyway, it was all to intimidate my workers. So they took me home and they searched the house. Of course, they found nothing. And they didn't even take the guns because I had licenses for them. Threw me in the cells knowing that a lawyer couldn't get me into court. I couldn't get to court before Monday. This was an intimidation tactic to put white farmers in the jail cell. Threw me in a cell that was about 12 foot by 12 foot. And I was the only white guy. And it was awful. The filthy floor. There was an open pit toilet in one corner, so you can imagine the smell. And during the night, they kept throwing more people in, mainly political prisoners. Some were criminals. And the government was slow in paying the police their salaries, so they used bribery as a means of survival. So they would arrest people on a pretext and then say to the family, if you want to see your son, husband, whatever, quickly come pay a fine and you can take him out. And of course, the fine was never recorded. It would find its way into various pockets. So that's why the population in the police cell fluctuated. And I had 3 days. It was not a problem being the only white guy. In fact, I couldn't have wished for a better experience. It was very humbling. These people, many of them would never live in a house with electricity or running water, or never own a car, maybe just a bicycle. And they would come to me and call me sir and say, can you help us? What do we say when the police take us to court? And I had to be careful because they used to put plants in the cells to try and get you to incriminate yourself. And I smuggled cigarettes in and I would pass the cigarettes around to these guys and they were eternally grateful. It was a real humbling experience. And yeah, that was 3 days. They dragged me into court on the Monday and I haven't shaved. I'm sleeping on a dirty floor, same clothes, absolutely filthy, into court. And I wanted to send me to remand prison in the bush for 6 months. A lot of people didn't survive those. And then my lawyer black guy was really good and he kept on and on and on. And eventually they said, okay, we'll let you out on bail on condition you never go back to your farm. So I've never seen my home since.
wow.
That was that story.
Wow. So do you see shades of what's going on in the Middle East, what you experienced?
Yeah, I think the story there is very complicated though. Unfortunately, I see shades of that here where we are with this whole virus issue. You know, whatever your thoughts on the virus, the way many governments are acting is, to me, having experienced what happens with authoritarian and totalitarian government when they abandon the rule of law, it's absolutely frightening. And for years, I could never understand how the Holocaust could have happened. How could ordinary people let that happen? When I see the division in society here and how the police are stopping protests and this, I think, wow, now we know how the Holocaust happened. So, yeah, I do. I see huge parallels. Yeah, it's very, very worrying times.
I think a lot of it is we don't teach history like we used to. And so, yeah. And the internet has opened up this vast world of misinformation and debunking the past, even though we have concrete facts that some of this happened.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, so interesting days, that's for sure.
I mean, you know, you can take it simply down to who in the world would have ever thought that the earth was now supposedly flat? If you look at a picture at the Concorde, you know, there's pictures on the internet of people being on the Concorde looking out the window, and you can see the horizon, and you can see the curvature of the earth. So
I know. On that one, we had a guy who's a real flat earth crusader on our podcast earlier this year. And he put such a good argument. You find yourself thinking, well, you know, maybe this guy's right. He's so good. And, you know, it's our most popular show ever, thousands of views on that particular show.
the thing is, I think if you push something and you're passionate enough about it, you can be a great debater about it. As long as you're passionate, people are going to buy it because you're passionate.
Yeah.
So I also see that you were a marathon runner. Are you still running marathons, or is that? Nah. I didn't think so, but
no, I'm walking now. Okay. Yeah, I started running. I'd always been active, a lot of Ep4 sports when I was young, and I played rugby, which we like to tease people from your country and my new country that rugby is a sport for real men, because it's played with the same sort of ball as American football, but with people with no protective gear whatsoever and no substitutes. You play for, unless you physically cannot walk, you're on that field for the 90 minutes, right? 2 halves of 45. No, I'm being facetious. Yeah, I mean, American football, I know, has a lot of skill and a lot of planning. I'm not knocking it, but we like to have
I've seen rugby games though.
We have a bit of fun with that. So I played rugby. And then I did a lot of Ep4 sports. And then I played squash or racquetball. And then I was in a sort of fairly heavy management position in the corporate world in my mid to late 30s, and playing squash when I could, sometimes twice a week, sometimes every 2 weeks, eating too much rich food, not drinking that much, smoking. And I thought, you know, this is not good for the health, this sort of thing. And at that time, my kids, I'd never been a runner, I was too slow. But my kids were at school, and the fun run craze started to raise money for churches, sports, soccer, whatever. So they kept on pressuring me, you know, and kids are really good. The one day they came home and said, you know, you're the only father between our 2 classes who doesn't support his kids at school in these fun runs. So I started running, and I was hopeless. I mean, I ended up walking on a 1 mile run or something. And then I thought I better take it seriously. And then I got the bug, and I really started. And the big prize was in South Africa. We had an ultra marathon called the Comrades, which at the time was the biggest ultra, 85 kilometers, 50 mile.
Wow.
And so I took 3 years. You have to run a standard in 40 minutes in less than 4 hours to qualify. So I did that. And then I ran 4 of the ultras. And then I messed my knee up. My doctor said, human body is not designed to run 50 miles in one day, you know, so I think you should run shorter distances. And then I went back farming, and it was impractical to run those long ones, and security was a problem. But I was still doing a lot of riding and walking. And then in Canada, with a damaged knee, I've been walking. So I walk every day. 4 kilometers, 2.5, 3 miles every morning early before I start work. It was always 6 days a week, sometimes 7. Sometimes I have a lay-in on a Sunday. And then 2019, I went to Europe, and I walked 250 kilometers. It's about 150 miles on the Camino de Santiago. That was a nice one. That was great.
And I see that you had a heart attack. So when you're talking about the smoking and everything, you know, do you think that kind of led to the heart attack, or it just?
That's exactly the question I asked my cardiologist, and he said, I had never smoked heavily for long periods. When we had real trouble in Zimbabwe, I did smoke 40 a day for a few months, but I had long periods I didn't smoke at all when I was running. And I ate a lot of red meat, but we didn't have much in the way of fast food where I came from, and we were out of pollution. We weren't in a polluted environment. He said, it's a lot genetics. His story, he says, everyone has plaque in their arteries. He said, who knows what knocks a little bit off and causes a blood clot, which causes the heart attack. He said, I've seen people super fit, heart attack. I've seen people absolutely abuse their bodies, overweight, drug addicts, everything bad. I don't have heart attacks. So he said, part of it's fate. He said, but I'm not saying you shouldn't look after your body. What he did say is my running and my active life probably saved my life when I did have the heart attack. So that was comforting. So I had the heart attack in 2010 and kept on riding horses until a couple of years ago. And then I had to have bypass surgery in 2017. And then I still felt good before that. I cut wood, we heat with wood. So I cut wood, I carry logs, I get on and off my tractor. And as I say, after the bypass, 2 years after that, year and a half after that, I walked 250 kilometers, no problem whatsoever. So, yeah.
I mean, I interviewed a guest recently whose girlfriend was flying out to watch him audition for something. And because of flying, a blood clot broke loose.
Blood clot, yeah.
And she ended up having a stroke. So he had to delay his audition a little bit, and she's okay. But yeah, I mean, she was healthy and she was in her early 20s. So
wow. Yeah. Scary stuff.
You don't know. You don't know. So what other big differences for you besides the red tape has Canadian life been like for you?
Okay, sort of going on from liking to live on the edge, very structured compared to what I was used to. I do find a little bit of a dichotomy here between the rural, and I think it'll be the same in your country, between the rural and urban. There's quite a divide. So I live on a farm. I don't farm, but I rent a house on a farm 6-7 miles outside the city. So I look out, I can see fields. People around here very similar to the people I knew at home in the farming community. In the city, I find people much more, I wouldn't say unfriendly, somewhat more distant than the rural people, and that's probably the same everywhere. So not a huge problem, but definitely more structured. On the plus side, it's nice to be able to buy gas every time you want gas. We had shortages of gas and diesel. We had to stock up and buy in bulk and have huge bulk tanks on farms. At times we couldn't even buy toilet paper, cooking oil, basic washing powder. That's what, here it's not a problem. No one's trying to kill me, so that's quite a nice change. I have to be careful. I have, touch wood, haven't had a speeding fine here, and I'm very careful not to, because back there, there was a degree of flexibility, and you wouldn't get your car locked up if you were doing 30 miles over the speed limit like you do here. If you got stopped at a roadblock there for a light not working on a trailer, which happened to me, the guy would say, your fine is $500. I say, I haven't got $500 on me. Or how much have you got? So you never kept all your money in one spot. You'd have a few in this pocket, and you'd start at 20 and you'd probably get away with 100. And you knew you weren't going to get a receipt for it, right? But that was it, end of story, done. So that was just the system. So yeah, it's structured, but life here is good. I'm not complaining at all. It's good. I found the language, and it really made me think about people who come here or come anywhere in the first world for whom English is not their first language. Because although I spoke English, the British English is very different to North American English. So I had some embarrassing moments. We have a big retail outlet called Canadian Tire, which is tools and hardware and stuff. And the first time my son took me into that, it was like a kid in a candy shop. We're looking at all the tools. Been there for an hour just looking, and I need to use the washroom. So I said to him, Sean, I need to use the toilet. So he said, well, go over to the courtesy place and ask the girl for the key. Unfortunately, he followed me. So I go over and I say to this young lady, can I borrow your toilet? She says, what? I said, can I borrow your toilet? What for? And I thought, well, how graphic do I have to get here? And Sean's behind me. He said, Dad, it's a washroom. She says, oh, the washroom, here's the keys. And we called wrenches, spanners, and pails, buckets, and the car hood and bonnet and boots and trunk.
I really thought you were going to say loo, so
we said that as well. Yeah, we used loo a lot. And in fact, because I used loo a few times here and everyone looked at me like I was from another planet, I went to toilet. I thought, well, yeah, it's accurate. No.
That being said, I'm from Louisiana originally, and I live in Illinois now. And even in Louisiana, because my grandfather and my great-grandfather worked on the railroad a little bit, there were certain words that they used that became family lingo. Mm-hmm. So like a suitcase, we called a grip.
Right.
So my friends were like, I'm like, well, where's your grip? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, your grip, the thing you put clothes in. You mean, no. And so there was a song at the time by Heart, and one of the lines was candle in your grip. They're like, wouldn't that set your clothes on fire? I'm like, really? Really? And I mean, I used to call a closet a locker
Yes.
because that's what, these were the things that my family used, the terms, and people would look at me like I was crazy. And then you had the words that were used in New Orleans, but not in the rest of Louisiana.
Right. Right.
Like neutral ground. Well, a neutral ground in New Orleans is a median everywhere else.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
So you're
Yeah.
like, okay, so yeah, I had to go through that, even though it was the same state.
Yeah.
I still had to go through this whole period of,
Differences.
yeah. And you're like,
Interesting.
yeah. And I mean, it was not even, I don't even know, it's maybe a 5-hour drive between the two places. So, so yeah.
Wow. So you know what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
I still slip up. I got used to calling it gas instead of petrol eventually. And of course, driving on the other side of the road took a bit of getting used to, that we drove on the left like the British system. So, but that wasn't too bad. As long as I could see other cars on the road, I was fine. But if I had to make a turn and there was not another car in sight, I had to really think about what I was doing. Yeah. So
I've only been to Canada one time, and I think we went to Toronto. It was only for a day, and I had never driven there. I mean, never been out of the country until that day. And it was like I had to drive, and I had to look at my speedometer differently, and it was just this whole cultural difference done instantaneous because we were going to a concert. So it was like, okay, how do I figure all this out? Because it's one thing when you're living there because you got time to get used to it.
that's right.
But when you're just dropped in, you're like, what am I going to do? So you just do your best you can.
Sure.
So you have your own podcast.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's called the Yaking Show, and it started in March last year. My co-host is Kathleen. We're involved in a couple of other businesses together. We've been working together for, I don't know, about 6 or 7 years on various projects. So in March last year, everyone was in the depths of doom and despondency about this virus thing, and people couldn't go out, and it was all misery. So we said, let's try and lighten people's lives up a little bit. And also, let's help some of our local businesses who are really struggling for publicity, who rely on networking and all this. So we started it. We thought we'll do a few episodes. It'll be fun. And we're up to 133. We've been doing 2 shows a week since March last year. We started off saying tips and ideas for a changing world. And then we said, our tagline now is awakening you to new perspectives for the changing world. So we try and get people who, some are a little bit edgy, a little different. We do have a lot of marketing people, quite a few coaches. We had a lot of authors. We had the flat earth guy, and we've had a few other people like that. We try and make it entertaining and useful and uplifting. Those are the 3 things we try and do. So we've had some really interesting people on there.
Yeah, podcasting, it's definitely an experience. You get to meet a lot of different people. I mean,
oh yeah. And it's fun. It's fun. A lot of people think it's an easy way to make money. It certainly isn't. And we work out from finding the person to finishing the whole thing with all the emails, 5 man-hours per show, per half-hour episode video. That's the video and the audio, as we put introductory slides and a few other little things on. So it's quite a time commitment. So in fact, we're going to have to cut down to 1 episode a week. We've got so much on the go, we can't do the 2. And we don't really want to farm out some of the work at this stage. We might have to later.
Yeah, I mean, today and yesterday, I talked to 2 people. One was a friend and one was just somebody else I knew on Facebook in a group. And they're like, wow, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. And they're like, it's just, and I'm thinking, and I tell them, I'm like, it's more work than you actually realize, because it's not just sitting here having this wonderful chat. It's all the other time that you have to put into editing and the video editing and the making of the logo for the episode. And then you have to market and share it and upload it. And if you're uploading it on YouTube, that could take half hour, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
So people don't understand all the little, I mean, it's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's a blast to do, but it's not as easy as just go, okay, I did this, let's go.
No.
So,
and we interviewed a really interesting guy. His name is Phil Pelucha from where is he in the States somewhere? No, he's English. That's right. He has a successful podcast. So he said, if you want to make money out of your podcast, you've got to not think of it as a TV show. He says, don't go for viewers, go to meet interesting people. He says, and that's without really deliberately doing that. We found that's the same. We haven't worried too much about views and that. It's nice when one really takes off on YouTube, but it's the interesting people we meet, and that leads to all sorts of things. So we do affiliate marketing, so we featured a lot of our authors' books, so we sell a few of those on Amazon. Brings in a little bit, but does the podcast pay its way? Oh, definitely not. But is it worth doing? Yes, it is, for all the other benefits. That's what we find anyway.
Well, like the one guy I was talking to that did the transfer from Dubai, he's done podcasting and stuff. And we were talking, I said, you can sit there and get lost in the numbers and worrying about how many views you've had and how many listens you've had. But the one you really should look at is how many places in the world you've reached.
Yes.
Because I mean, yes. When you can sit there and think that you're in your house and you're contacting all over the place globally, that to me says so much more than, oh, look, I've had this many views.
That's right. Oh, yes. No, you're right. And we interviewed yesterday, Monday, we had somebody from France. We have someone from Portugal next week on Tuesday. We've had Australia, South Africa, Ireland, many other countries. Yeah. And our audience is international. So yeah, it is good. Yeah.
And I think it's powerful. If you're able to translate somebody else's story. I met a gentleman from England who actually lives in Japan now, and he's a neuroscientist. And we had this lovely conversation.
Right.
And it's been a popular episode because we talked about not only Freemasonry, but we talked about life, the differences in life and everything else. So I think if you gear your show to expand the knowledge and make people realize that they're sharing something personal, the person that's listening, then they're learning while they're listening. And it's not so much something that they're actually, oh, you have to hear this. It's more, as my friend says about my show, she's like, it's like I'm sitting at a coffee shop eavesdropping. Mm-hmm. And I like that.
Good analogy. Yeah, very good. And we find we get exposed to all sorts of different technologies. Like we had a guy that was talking about the radiation you get from phones and these things and what you can do to counter it. So that was an interesting one. And we're talking to someone next week or the week after, soon anyway, about the Internet of Things, this parallel infrastructure to power an internet for all the smart devices that don't need the normal internet. So this is like your robot vacuum cleaners and lawnmowers and pet trackers and this. It's a whole idea of trying to get traffic off the internet to free up more space for video, et cetera, and have a stable and good. So we're looking closely at some of that stuff. It's fascinating.
I want to go to, your walk in Porto in Portugal and in Santiago in Spain. Mm-hmm. So you were carrying your own backpack and you had to go to pilgrim hostels. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it was one of the nicest experiences on many levels in my whole life. It's something I wanted to do for probably 4 or 5 years. I'd heard about it, and I realized at my age, I was then 69 when I did it. My running days are over, and with a knee problem and that. So I thought, well, let's go on this walk. And then I saw the movie with, I've forgotten his name now. It was a well-known movie, a famous movie about this Camino de Santiago. And I thought, well, that really means I want to do it. So we have a pilgrim association in Canada. So I joined that and I went on hikes with them and looked at videos and spoke to people who'd been on it. So I planned it. And in September 2019, I went off on my own. I've never been to Europe. I've been to England many times since leaving there as a kid. Never been to mainland Europe. And I flew into Portugal and found my way around Porto, which is a fascinating old city. And I didn't really want to stay in a hotel there that night. I was on a limited budget. So I started walking. No idea where I was going to spend the night. Right? I just started walking. And I thought, well, how bad can it be? The temperature's about 20 degrees. It's not going to rain. I can sleep under a bush if I have to. Anyway, I found an old monastery. That was my first night stop, they were a pilgrim hostel in this huge monastery. Spent the night there and then just kept walking I planned to do it in 12 days, but I realized I'd allowed 14 for my flight out of Santiago. And I realized that 12 days was going to leave me 2 days or 3 days in Santiago, which would A, be more expensive, and B, I'm not a great city person. So I thought a day would be enough. So I slowed down, and I alternated my stops so that they didn't correspond with the guidebook that most people follow. So I was staying at the more offbeat places, and it worked. It was a really good strategy because all those hostels had beds when I got there. Whereas if I'd stayed at the main stopping points, I might not have found a bed. And there's so many hostels it's different now. I could have walked on and found something. So I just took my time, and I think my longest day was 18 miles, if I took in miles, and my shortest day was about 8 or 9 miles. And I very quickly got into a routine of starting quite early before it got hot. Made the mistake of starting in the dark one day and missing a signpost and walking about 4 miles the wrong way. But
Oh,
yeah, so I didn't do that again. No, actually I did in the rain, but not only for a mile. And then I would find the first time after 10 o'clock in the morning was I would try and find a coffee shop very early and just have a coffee and a croissant on the way out. And then at midday or somewhere after 10, I'd find another coffee shop and have a bun or something light. And then I'd find a hostel mid-afternoon, late afternoon. If it was in an old city, and there's plenty of them, obviously I'd go sightseeing, walking around these old places. And then I would find a restaurant that offered a pilgrim's menu. And for, I think it was €5 or €6, under $10, you could get a jug of wine or a very big glass of red wine, or wine. I took red. You'd get a piece of bread, you'd get a soup, you'd get a main course, which was either fish or something, and quite often a dessert, all for that price. I mean, for nothing. So
wow.
my budget was €25 a day, and some days I only spent €20, and that was my plan. And I just kept doing that for 12 days, and then slowed down. And one of yours. We have 8 wandering around. There's nobody up here at the moment.
That's Chloe. She
And
always makes an appearance. Sorry.
no, it was just such a lovely experience, and what is nice, you walk on your own, but there's always people on the route, so you can catch up to some or drop back, and you might walk for an hour with 1 or 2 or 3 people, and then you go your separate ways. You might meet someone while you're having coffee and sit with them for a while and then walk. So you get the best of solitude as you want it and company as you want it, and then you have a chat in the evenings. Hostels are clean. They're very basic, the municipal hostels, but you got hot water, you get cooking facilities, you can make tea or coffee. And some people stay in private hotels, which are better, or private. I've stayed in a couple of private hostels, slightly better, but lots of women on their own. I spoke to many. I said, any problems? None at all. It's very safe. We have no hassle whatsoever. And I thought I'd be one of the oldest. I met a woman of 84 from Australia who just walked 100 kilometers, 60 miles with her daughter. Several in their late 70s and early 80s who'd walked hundreds of kilometers or miles. And a younger woman, about 38, 39, I guess, had ridden a bicycle from Holland, 2,500 kilometers to Santiago on a bicycle, carrying her pack. And she took a lightweight tent, and when she couldn't find a hostel, she just camped in a farmer's field. Right? And, it's amazing stories. It's real wonderful experience. And the history, I've got pictures where I walked on the Roman road, and it's got the signpost on the side, Ep4, I think it is, from part of Spain through to Rome, and it's been asphalted over, but the walls are still there from the Roman days. Wow. Roman bridges that haven't changed. The stones are all worn in grooves from footprints, right? Flagstone paths along rivers that have been there for 2,000 years.
So, I mean, this must, besides the history, it also must have been kind of Zen-like for you, to be in the zone when you're walking, and very peaceful, and, you don't have to be connected to everything then.
I took my phone just to keep in touch with home, but it was switched off all day. I would phone in once at night to let them know I was okay. The rest of the time it was off. In the one city, the route map, the map guide was not so good. So I used Google Maps in one city. I needed to go and buy a shirt. I took cotton t-shirts and they were too hot when they were still wet after washing to carry. So I went to buy some lightweight walking shirts. But apart from that, didn't use it at all.
Nice. I mean, that's one thing. We've all become so dependent on technology now that, people don't. I remember when we used to get when I would renew my insurance, I'd go to the office and I would get the big atlas. So you would plan your trips through the atlas.
That's right.
And now, no, just tell my phone where I want to go and it tells me.
Yeah.
So there you go.
But on that trip, it was celebrating that all I had to worry about was what was in my pack on my back, right?
Yeah.
So I had the minimum clothes that I needed. I had a couple of tea bags, some snack bars, and not my gels. And that's all you have to worry about. No computer, no phone, car, no nothing. Just
nice.
And once you're a bit apprehensive the first day because it was my first time I did it. Once you got into the flow of it, you'll find somewhere to sleep that night. You'll find something to eat. No more worries.
So Toastmasters, I hear a lot about Toastmasters. Tell us a little about it.
It's an organization started way back in the 30s, I think. I can't remember now. Can't even remember the guy who started it, but it was to encourage. It was at the time in America when a lot of young men were leaving the farms to move into the cities and to get into business, and were totally ill-equipped to make that transition. And Toastmasters was started as a place for them to learn a little bit more about talking to other people, essentially, and talking in public. And it grew, and then it took them about 20 years, I think, before they allowed women to come in. And then it really took off after that. It's in most of the countries of the world, clubs in most cities. I think it's taken a bit of a knock in this virus thing, as have most of the service clubs too. I found it very good. I was a member for 8 years, president of a club for a few years on the next level up, which was, I think, a district executive chairman, something. Really good for getting younger people with little management and speaking experience to gain confidence in a safe environment. All sorts of courses, learning strategies, and did me a lot of good. And I had done a bit of public speaking before I joined. Did a lot more public speaking until the virus hit. I was doing a fair bit of public speaking. So yeah, it's really good.
The virus has really just changed everything for a lot of people.
Totally. Yeah.
Did you, when you were talking about how you had to ration all that stuff when you lived in Zimbabwe, the toilet paper, the gas and everything, how did that, I don't know, in Canada, here, I managed to have enough in my house not to worry about that but how did you feel? Were things rationed in Canada? As far as when you went to the grocery store, was things missing, like toilet paper or whatever?
There were shortages last year. This year, not too bad. There's still shortages of some stuff. It's not that you can't get it. You can't get as many brands as you used to. And what did I want to buy? Some electrical tool, a sander or something. And I went to Home Depot and I spoke to the guy there. I said, I want a sander. He said, we haven't got many left. He said that 5 foot of shelf space in normal times would be full of small sanders, palm sanders and all would be full. He said, there's 2 left, so you better grab one. He says, I don't know when we're getting more. So something's still short. Everyday groceries, I don't do. My partner does the shopping. I can't stand supermarket shopping, so she looks after it all. And she says the worst problem is that it's gone up in price. Now, today they announced inflation in Canada was 3%, but I track our expenditure for budgeting, and we are something like 40% up on our household expenditure over a year ago. So there's been some huge price increases.
Yeah. Gas here down here has gone up in the last, I would say, 6 months. Mm-hmm. It keeps increasing. So yeah, inflation is an always ever changing thing. Even though they say it hasn't really increased that much, we know better.
We know better. Absolutely. Yeah.
So where do you see your podcast going? What do you hope to do? What is your long-term goal with your podcast?
The long-term goal, we're going to cut down to 1 episode a week. We're going to try and get a better range or diversity of people on the podcast. And yeah, we're not really seeing it as a money-making thing. It's more a fun thing, and to try and help some business people get a bit of exposure, brighten a few people's lives. And if we get spin-off publicity from it ourselves, we do promote our links on there. It's a fun thing as much as a business thing, but we see it connected. We see it. and we enjoy it. Like you said, it's fun.
So I have to ask, was it better to have gone through everything in Zimbabwe to end up where you are now?
Yes, lots of people say to me, what would you have done differently? I said, well, I don't know. Do I regret any of it? No, because I wrote a book. I wouldn't have had the stories for the book if I hadn't gone through that experience in life. And there's a lot of other scary stuff I haven't even told you about. So I really feel fortunate that I've had such an interesting life. I really do. So I don't, with hindsight, I might well have gone to England instead of Canada. That's perhaps one change I might have made. But then I wouldn't have seen much of my son. So
this is true. Tell me about your book.
It's an interesting one. When I was doing a lot of public speaking, my theme is overcoming adversity and thriving on adversity using stories of my life. And then I have another one called The Paradox of Prosperity, talking about one of the most contented men I've ever met was an black African retired policeman who had a small farm. That's another story. Anyway, so a lot of people said, have you got a book? You should write a book, should write a book, should write a book. So eventually I said, okay, I'm going to write a book. So I got up at 5 o'clock every morning. I wasn't walking in the morning then for 6 months. And I wrote 1,000 words or for an hour every weekday morning, whichever came first. And I think I only missed 2 mornings that whole period. And I ended up, everyone said, you need to write about 200 pages. So I did on a Word document. And then I tried to find an editor and I couldn't find one suitable or that I could afford. And I got hold of a book coach in, where was she living? In Boston, I think, somewhere. And she said, she liked my accent and she knew someone from Rhodesia. So anyway, she felt sorry for me. She said, send me your manuscript. And how long is it? I said, it's 200 pages. She said, in paperback format. And I said, no, in a Word doc. She said, that will be 400 pages in paperback. Oh, she said, look, send me the file. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'll have a quick look and give you some ideas. So I did. And I'm eternally grateful because she sent it back. She came back to me and said, unless you're famous or infamous, memoirs don't sell very well, right? Your family might love them, but they're not going to be top sellers. She said, but there's so much good stuff in your book. I think you should make it more like a how-to book, how to survive tough times, and break it into 5 sections and use 5 stories from your big book to illustrate each section. So that's what I did. It's got 5 sections and it's got 5 stories of my life in each one. And it talks about choice, determination, gratitude, and acceptance, perseverance, think, don't panic. Those, I think, are the 5 sections, and each one has 5 little stories to support it. So I sold a few hundred copies, sold out my first printing, and Murphy's Law, when I went to get a reprint from the Canadian printer, they'd gone out of business during this virus shutdown.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I'm using a printer in Wisconsin. It's being printed within the next week or 2. And they've come in at a third of the price of the best of 3 separate quotes I got from Canadian printers. Right?
Wow.
But to be fair to them, they do specialize in the short run prints. So I'm only getting another 200 or 300 copies, I think. But they've been really good. So it'll be here soon.
I think that's a very, just those words, think, don't panic. I think that's a very timely statement because in the time of the pandemic and the world we live in right now, that is a lot of it. It's panic and fear. And people
absolutely.
aren't thinking, they're just panicked.
People say to me, why don't you get worked up about this virus? I said, well, look, it's anything but I've got between 97 and 99% chance of surviving it. I said, when you've had guns pointed at you and you've been thrown in jail and you've been run over by horses and cars and bad motorbike accidents, there's a lot more serious things to worry about than something that I'm probably not going to die from anyway, if I get it. So, and if I get it, I can't change anything. That's going to happen or it's not going to happen. So I'm not panicking.
Yeah. I mean, eventually we all pass. I mean,
absolutely.
We all die. It happens. And, you kind of have to look at it when it's your time to go, it's your time to go.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. and no point in being miserable and missing out on life because you're frightened of something.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you never know where life's, I mean, if you sit there and you put yourself in a little box and not experience life, then you're going to miss out.
For sure. Miss out. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, it's been a very fascinating conversation, Peter. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have
So have
too.
I. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Donna.
Is there anything, I mean, I'm going to put all your links. I'll even find your book and put a link in the bio for your book. Is there anything you want to tell the audience before we sign off?
Just if you want to find out more about me, my link for my blog will be on there. You'll be able to get my book from that blog as well. And if anyone wants to be on our podcast, contact me and you certainly will have a look.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, guys, for tuning in to the Better 2 podcast. Your listenership is greatly appreciated. If you like what you hear, remember to hit subscribe. We also have our videos on YouTube. They're usually posted the same day as the podcast, and you should check it out. If you have a question or you would like to be a guest on the show, please drop me an email, and I'll be glad to talk to you about it. The email is Donna, D-A-U-N-A, at thebetter2podcast.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and catch you next time.